You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's chief political correspondent, Jessica Elgot, and the Conservative commentator, Tim Montgomerie. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Telegraph leads with the question surrounding Prince Andrew after the guilty verdict in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. He denies any wrongdoing. The Mirror speaks to a witness from the trial with the headline, "Andrew must tell all he knows." The Mail says the Prince should be quaking in his boots. Meanwhile, COVID dominates some of the other papers. The Guardian warns that a lack of tests for NHS staff could have devastating impact. The Star calls the lack of testing kits daylight swabbery, with a picture there of David Jason in Only Fools and Horses. Scotland's The National quotes from what it calls an SNP end-of-year scorecard, which describes the Conservative government as corrupt on all counts. And according to the Financial Times, worldwide mergers and acquisitions deals in 2021 were worth a total of $5.8 trillion. Joining me tonight to take us through the papers, Jessica Elgot and Tim Montgomerie. Welcome to you both. Jessica, let's start with you and the front page of The Mirror. Their headline there, as I was saying, Andrew must tell all he knows.
Yes, and you know, considering how bad it could have been, Andrew didn't face as much scrutiny as he could have done during Maxwell's actual trial. But he's not going to be able to dodge that spotlight in the new year when he's sued for this alleged sexual assault. And she's due in a New York court for the next stage of her civil action against him. And this will, you know, although he hasn't been the centre of attention of this trial, because Virginia Giuffre wasn't called as a witness, he's certainly going to have, you know, the spotlight back on him in the new year when she sues him. So it really is the start of the torment, I think, for Prince Andrew over this terrible episode.
Tim?
Yeah, well, I think most of us are grateful for some respite from COVID stories, but certainly someone who won't be grateful will be, I think, Prince Andrew. Clearly, the focus is now on him and on reports that 300 other British people in Ghislaine Maxwell's sort of diary of contacts are also being approached by authorities. So obviously a lot of those people will be completely innocent of anything, but the authorities are trawling her contacts list for people who might in some way have been part of the sex trafficking ring that she's been found guilty of being part of. So yes, there is a certain member of the royal family who will be worried, but I think the big challenge now for the police and other investigating authorities on both sides of the Atlantic is to find the other people that were the beneficiaries of this terrible abuse of young women.
Yes, and we must reiterate that Prince Andrew has strenuously denied all accusations levelled against him. The Mail we saw there, their headline, though, saying quaking in his boots. Jessica?
Yes, and I think that one of the things this trial shows is that there was an air around Epstein of a kind of an untouchability of a billionaire able to do whatever he liked and get away with whatever he liked, and to a certain extent around Maxwell as well. And no more so is there an aura of that around, you know, members of the royal family, where, you know, sometimes it's felt like rules haven't applied, and now there is a justice system seeking to get to the truth. Now he denies it, and you know, from his perspective, potentially justice will find him completely innocent. But what this, I think that there's one of the things that this shows is that these kinds of horrible crimes can catch up with you, and thank God they did in this circumstance. But that will worry people who have got something to hide.
Let's
Gillian,
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, Gillian, you're absolutely right to say, you know, Prince Andrew affirms his innocence on all of this, and that is absolutely the due process. But at the very least, I think we all know he has been guilty of a massive error of judgment, in continuing, for example, to visit Epstein even after he had been convicted of sexual offences. So he may be innocent of the main charges, but he certainly deserves, I think, a lot of the public disgust at how he's behaved.
Let's move on to The Guardian and this story looking at the lack of COVID tests, the fact that there aren't enough tests to go around, and perhaps prioritising. Sajid Javid is suggesting that NHS workers need to be prioritised in terms of getting the kits to avert disaster. Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, and this is really the kind of biggest mounting issue, I think, that there is around this astonishing number of COVID infections that there are currently. I mean, I'm sure all of us know the most amount of people who've got COVID that we've ever known throughout the whole pandemic, and 189,000 today. Well, obviously that's not necessarily 189,000 people today, but that's the figure for the infections today. And so there's understandably so. There's a lack of tests because of the sheer numbers, and the Health Secretary Sajid Javid is being urged to ensure that NHS workers are prioritised for these tests, because otherwise there could be a huge impact on patient care. I mean, potentially there is already going to be, because of the numbers of staff isolating. But the BMA has said that, which is the union that represents doctors, saying that the system for ensuring that staff gets these tests is just not working at the moment, and that's PCR tests and lateral flow tests, even though healthcare workers are supposedly being given priority. But there's also calls for other really essential workers like teachers to get the priority access to these tests, because otherwise we're going to have huge swathes of the teaching staff isolating. And although Boris Johnson said he's absolutely determined to keep schools open, if there's no teachers to teach in them, then that's going to make the return to school very difficult. So I think one of the big difficulties of this wave of the pandemic that we're going to see is this what Number 10 likes to call workplace resilience, which is basically that there's no one to drive trains or to teach schools or to treat people in hospitals, because everybody's isolating.
Yeah, and another factor sort of boosting the demand is that the self-isolation period, as we know in England, has been cut from 10 days to 7 days, and that allows for 2 negative tests. And Tim, you were nodding along there because you've just come out of isolation yourself.
Well, I hope almost, I've had a pretty miserable 7 days, the last 7 days over Christmas. I've been completely self-isolating. I've had my first positive test today in the sense that I'm free of COVID. I have another one tomorrow. And I'm hoping for what one friend called a New Year mass, sort of celebrate Christmas at New Year. But there's other good news. I think from South Africa, we've learned today that the president there, Ramaphosa, has said that the peak of infections has now passed there. And The Guardian describes the BMA warning about a devastating, I think that's the word, challenge facing the National Health Service. And of course, we have to be on alert. But I'm getting a little bit tired with the general sort of media doom and gloom about all of this. Everything is devastating or crisis or whatever. Actually, I think we should now be clear that Omicron is not the great threat that we worried that it was a month or so ago. Yes, we need to be vigilant. Yes, there is a problem of availability of tests, and it does seem sensible to prioritise key workers. But can we all calm down a little bit more now? But
aren't we still waiting on more data to arrive at that conclusion? I mean, we've heard today these Nightingale spur hospitals springing up, so we don't seem to be out of the woods as you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that we're completely out of the woods. I've just said we need to be vigilant, but continuing to sort of freeze lives, freeze the economy on the basis of absolute precautionary principle that things may still get worse, when actually the overwhelming evidence that we do have so far is that Omicron really is very transmissible, but for the vast majority of people who receive it, it's no worse than a cold. I have been self-isolating for the last 7 days. I've had no ill effects at all. I've been hopefully sensible. I haven't gone home, to infect or risk my elderly parents, but actually it's had no negative effects on me at all. And I think, the movement of the quarantine period down from 10 to 7 days is sensible. America, of course, have moved to 5 days. And I hope Britain might follow that example before too long.
Jessica, do you agree with Tim that there's probably a bit of doom-mongering going on?
I mean, I think that obviously it's good that Omicron has not, I think that we shouldn't be afraid when we're writing news stories to write positive things, that, when the evidence emerges that Omicron is milder, or there's fewer hospitalizations or long stays in hospital with Omicron, then that's, clearly a positive thing. I think, as you'll hear Chris Whitty often caution, that when you have such high infection rates, then that a small percentage of a large number is still a very large number, and therefore, that's one of the reasons why there is a need for caution, and also extremely high infection rates. Also, as far as I understand it, and I've heard people say on that Downing Street podium, means that there's more likely for new variants to evolve. When there's such high case rates. So I don't think we should necessarily think that we're in a great situation. And especially when it comes to, I've seen today, huge swathes of the rail network having to be cancelled because staff just can't get in to man the trains. But, I agree with Tim, we're in a much better situation than we were in this time last year, when it really felt like, we're standing in the middle of the abyss, apart from the only glimmer of hope we had was the vaccine on the horizon. And that seems to be the thing that is really saving us this time round, that we're not seeing as many serious illnesses and certainly not seeing as many deaths because there's so many people vaccinated, and we've had such a great vaccine effort in this country. And it is worrying how many people are still unvaccinated, and how those people still seem to be the ones who are getting the most ill from this variant. And it's hard to see how much more convincing you need to take a vaccine than seeing some of those statistics.
Let's move on to the divide in opinion, according to a report in the Financial Times, as to whether children aged 5 to 11 should be vaccinated. Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd sort of slightly tangential, Gillian. Perhaps I'm not going to answer your question, but my general view is, children aren't that vulnerable to COVID. And this sort of underlines for me sort of a problem I think we've had in the West. We're trying to completely protect ourselves from this virus by vaccinating ever more people, ever more often. And actually, I think it's much more likely that we would protect ourselves if we were more generous with people in the developing world. There's still many parts of the world which haven't really had any serious levels of vaccination. And I think we'd protect our children, we'd affect our older people, we'd affect the most vulnerable members in society. Actually, if, as Gordon Brown has recommended, former Prime Minister, we were more generous to the poorer parts of the planet that we share. And so I have mixed views on vaccinating children, but it seems to me largely besides the point.
Okay, let's have a look at the Financial Times and take us back to those Downing Street flat refurbishments. What is the very latest that we're hearing?
Yes, so the latest, and it will be a sigh of relief for Boris Johnson, is that his independent advisor on ministerial standards, Lord Geit, is going to clear him again of wrongdoing. Now, this is an investigation that Lord Geit has had to reopen into the Downing Street flat refurbishments, because there seemed to be quite a significant inconsistency between his report where he first cleared the Prime Minister, which was quite a few months ago, and the Electoral Commission, which looked into the actions of the Conservative Party around it, which found that there were some sort of grievous errors or mistakes or omissions in the way that the donations for this lavish refurbishment were reported, and so therefore they admonished the Conservative Party and gave them a rather large fine, and it seemed like that Boris Johnson had misled Lord Geit by saying he hadn't been aware of the involvement of this donor, Lord Brownlow, until February. Then the Electoral Commission had some WhatsApps from November, so it appeared that Lord Geit might be on the brink of resignation. But he seems to have reconciled himself to it. So we read in the Financial Times today, and he's just going to say that there was a few silly mistakes made and clear Boris Johnson again. And I suspect this isn't going to do an awful lot to restoring faith in the way that politicians are monitored or looked after, them, or their standards are
are looked after, especially in the face of some of the things we've seen over the last few months. Boris Johnson's attempt to revoke some of the powers of the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, another watchdog. So we'll see what the fallout from this one looks like.
But Tim, it does still seem to be that the Prime Minister's conduct will be criticised.
Yes, and it won't help his authority within the Conservative Party or the nation. I think I've been speaking to Conservative MPs and so on a little bit over the period, and I think the feverishness about his position as Prime Minister has probably subsided. I think the best thing he has going for him is the lack of consensus about an alternative to Prime Minister to take over from him. But I think the thing that would change the opinion of Conservative MPs is if we have another sort of ethical question over him. If, for example, we learn that he has misled Parliament, particularly over the question of parties in Downing Street. He's only sort of one or two things like that away from his leadership still being challenged. So it's vital, really, for his future that he contains an issue like this. It seems from what the FT is reporting that he might just have done enough to stop that resignation that Jessica mentioned seemed possible previously. But clearly he's at very least, his arrangements in his organisation are chaotic, if not unethical.
Jessica, very quickly, we've got about 30 seconds to tell us about the unseasonably warm temperatures. Well, I don't know if warm is probably an exaggeration on the front of The Guardian to take us into the new year.
Yes, well, I mean, for those of us who like to spend New Year's Day in a bracing walk, that's quite cheering news. Although, unseasonably, we are seeing all these kind of unseasonably warm days or extreme weather, and I think that's for those of us that are concerned about climate change. I don't want to be the traditional Guardian gloomster, but it is something that makes us all the more worried. But I'm sure that some of us can still enjoy the sunshine on a New Year walk as well.
Yes. I don't know if I'll go so far as going to the beach, but yes, a long walk would be recommended. Jessica and Tim, thank you very much. See you in the next hour.